Commander Vexthal of the Corvani Empire pressed his scarred claws against the recording device, purple blood dripping from deep gashes across his reptilian face. Each breath sent waves of pain through his shattered ribs, but he forced himself to continue. The bridge of his once mighty dreadnought, Shadowbane, now lay in complete ruins around him, sparking consoles through dancing shadows on the twisted metal walls. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear the hiss of escaping atmosphere. "This is my final testimony," he rasped, his voice barely rising above the dying groans of his ship. "Let all who hear this recording understand the terrible mistake we made when we first encountered the species they call humans." He paused, wincing, as another wave of pain shot through his chest. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the blue-green planet Earth floating peacefully in space, looking so innocent and beautiful. It was hard to believe that such a small world had brought the mighty Corvani Empire to its knees. 3 cycles ago, everything seemed so simple. Vexthal continued, his yellow eyes growing distant with memory. The Corvani fleet approached the 3rd planet of a small system the humans called Sol. Our intelligence reports painted a picture of another primitive civilization, barely worth the fuel costs of conquest. They had only just achieved faster than light communication, and their most advanced weapons were crude chemical explosives that could barely scratch our armor plating. He remembered the confidence in the war room that day. Fleet Admiral Korax had laughed, his massive frame shaking with amusement as he studied the holographic displays showing human cities. "Look at these pathetic structures," the Admiral had sneered. "Made of metal and glass, not even proper force fields. We could conquer this world before the next meal cycle." Vexthal had agreed. After all, the Corvani had conquered 47 worlds in the past decade alone. Each victory had followed the same pattern: orbital bombardment, ground invasion, surrender, subjugation. The humans should have been conquest number 48, nothing more than another entry in the Imperial records. "It should have been simple," Vexthal whispered to the recording device. "Just another routine conquest." But from the very first moment, these humans showed us something we had never encountered before. The memory of that first day still sent chills down his scaled spine. As the Corvani war fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere like dark angels of death, their plasma cannons began raining destruction on the major population centers. Cities that had stood for centuries vanished in brilliant flashes of superheated energy. Millions of humans died in those first few hours, but instead of the expected chaos, panic, and desperate pleas for mercy that usually followed such displays of power, something extraordinary happened. The human communication channels came alive with the most unexpected response that Corvani had ever witnessed. "They sent us mathematics," Vexthal said, still unable to believe it even now, as our ships burned their cities to ash as their people died by the millions. They responded with complex equations, detailed star charts, and complete biological data about their own species. Every communication channel flooded with information about human physiology, their history, their technology, their culture, even their weaknesses. He remembered standing on the bridge of the Shadowbane, watching the tactical displays fill with incoming data streams. His communications officer, a young Corvani named Zektor, had turned to him with confusion written across his features. "Commander Zektor had said, his voice filled with bewilderment, "The humans are broadcasting their genetic codes, their military capabilities, even the locations of their remaining population centers. Why would they give us information that could help us destroy them more efficiently?" That question had haunted Vexthal from the very beginning. He had ordered his science teams to analyze the transmissions, expecting to find hidden messages or some form of psychological warfare. Instead, they found exactly what it appeared to be: a comprehensive education about humanity, freely given to their destroyers. "I watched one of their settlements continue broadcasting even as our plasma fire reduced it to molten slag," Vexthal recalled, his voice growing softer. A human female named Ji-Wan stood in the ruins of what they called Sol, calmly narrating the destruction around her. She described how our weapons worked, how our ships moved, how our soldiers behaved. Even as the buildings collapsed around her, she kept talking, kept teaching, kept analyzing. The strangest part had been her tone. There was no hatred in her voice, no desperation or fear. She spoke like a scientist making observations, cataloging every detail of the Corvani attack with professional curiosity. Right up until the moment the transmission cut out, she had been describing the thermal patterns of Corvani plasma weaponry. Why do they teach us about themselves while we burn their world? Vextel had wondered aloud on that first day, the question escaping his lips before he could stop it. His tactical officer. Mordok had suggested it might be some form of surrender ritual unique to human culture. Perhaps they believe that showing submission through knowledge sharing will earn them better treatment as slaves. Mordok had theorized. But Vextel had felt something cold settle in his stomach even then. The way the humans shared their information felt less like surrender and more like ... preparation. As if they were students taking notes during a particularly interesting lecture. The subject being taught was the Corvani Empire itself. What? The Corvani didn't realize in those first crucial hours was that every transmission, every piece of data, every seemingly innocent question was actually part of something far more dangerous than any weapon they had ever faced. The humans weren't just sharing information about themselves. They were learning, and humans, as the Corvani would soon discover, were very, very quick learners. The ground invasion began on what humans called Tuesday, though Vextel would later remember it as the day everything started going wrong. He had led hundreds of planetary assaults before, and they all followed the same predictable pattern. First came the shock of overwhelming force, then the desperate attempts at resistance, followed by surrender and finally subjugation. It was a dance the Corvani had perfected across dozens of worlds, standing in the command module of his dropship as it descended through Earth's smoky atmosphere. Vextel felt the familiar surge of anticipation. Below him, the eastern continent spread out like a detailed map, its major cities already reduced to smoking craters from the orbital bombardment. The few remaining population centers would fall within hours, maybe less. Target acquired, Commander, his pilot announced. Human settlement designated Sol, showing minimal energy signatures. Estimated survivors, 3,000, mostly civilians. Vextel nodded, checking his plasma rifle one final time. 3,000 terrified, demoralized. Humans would surrender the moment they saw Corvani battle armor. Then he could move on to the next settlement and the next, until this entire continent bowed before the Empire. The dropship touched down in what had once been the center of Sol, its landing thrusters scattering debris from destroyed buildings. Vextel's assault team deployed with military precision, their heavy footsteps echoing through the eerily quiet streets. Smoke still rose from the ruins around them, and the acrid smell of melted metal filled the air. But something felt different, wrong. In every other conquest, survivors would be hiding in basements, sewers, anywhere they could find shelter from the terror falling from the sky. Instead, Vextel could see humans moving purposefully through the rubble, not fleeing, but ... organizing. They worked in small groups, helping injured people, gathering supplies, and strangest of all, they seemed to be taking notes, movement. Ahead, Commander, Sergeant Krextal reported through the CUM system. A large group of humans in the central plaza. They don't appear to be fleeing. Vextel raised his armored hand, signaling his squad to halt. Through his helmet's targeting system, he could see them clearly. About 200 humans stood in the ruins of what had been a public square, and they were doing something that defied all logic. They were holding what appeared to be a meeting. At the center of the group stood a human male, maybe 30 years old by their species standards. He was tall for a human, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed strangely calm for someone whose world was being destroyed. This was Tehayan, though Vextel wouldn't learn his name until later. "Surround them," Vextel ordered, his voice booming through his suit's external speakers. Standard intimidation formation. His soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, their massive forms creating a perfect circle around the humans. Each Corvane warrior stood over 8 feet tall in their power armor, plasma weapons gleaming in the smoky sunlight. It was a sight that had broken the will of countless species, but these humans didn't break. They didn't even seem particularly afraid. Taehyun stepped forward from the group, his hands empty and visible, but his posture confident. When he spoke, Vextal nearly dropped his weapon in shock. Your plasma weapons operate at approximately 40,000 degrees Celsius, the human said in perfect Corvani, his pronunciation flawless, despite speaking an alien language he couldn't have known existed a week ago. The energy signature suggests a crystalline power source, probably some form of focused kyber crystal technology. Fascinating design, really. Much more elegant than our crude chemical propellants. The silence that followed was so complete that Vextal could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. In 40 years of military service, across dozens of conquered worlds, he had never encountered anything like this. How could this primitive human speak fluent Corvani? How could he know technical details about weapons that were classified military? Secrets. How do you? Double, quotes Vextal began, then stopped himself. He was a commander of the Corvani Empire, not some confused recruit. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick, he snarled, raising his plasma rifle. But Taehyun just smiled. And that smile sent ice through Vextal's veins. We've been analyzing your attack patterns from the orbital footage, the human continued conversationally. Your soldiers always form the same encirclement pattern, 60-degree spacing with the commander positioned at bearing 270 degrees. Standard intimidation protocol, I assume? Before Vextal could process what he was hearing, Taehyun raised his hand in what looked like a casual gesture. Suddenly, the entire group of humans scattered with impossible coordination. They didn't run in panic like frightened animals. They moved like a military unit that had trained together for years, each person knowing exactly where to go and when to go there. Some dove behind rubble that provided perfect cover from Corvani firing positions. Others disappeared into drainage tunnels that Vexal's sensors hadn't even detected. A few simply seemed to vanish into shadows that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide a human child, let alone an adult. Fire? Fire? Vextal roared, but his soldiers' plasma bolts struck empty air and broken concrete. In less than 10 seconds, 200 humans had simply disappeared. That was when the real nightmare began. The guerrilla war that followed over the next several weeks defied every military doctrine in the Corvani training manual. Vextal had studied the tactics of 47 conquered species, and none of them had fought like this. The humans seemed to anticipate every Corvani move before it was made. A human female named Sora emerged as one of their most effective leaders. She led lightning raids against Corvani supply depots, using weapons that shouldn't have existed. The first time Vextal saw her handiwork, he stared in disbelief at the melted remains of an armored transport. Impossible, he muttered, running his scanner over the damage. This was caused by focused plasma discharge, but humans don't have plasma technology. His science officer, Nexfer, looked up from his own readings with confusion written across his scaled features. Commander, these energy patterns match our own weapons exactly, but the focusing array is ... different. It's more efficient. Would actually be more powerful than our standard rifles. The horrible truth hit Vextal like a physical blow. The humans had reverse-engineered Corvani plasma, technology from the weapons fire they'd observed during the orbital bombardment. Not only had they copied it, they had somehow improved it. They don't fight like any species we've conquered. Vexal reported to Fleet Command during his next scheduled communication. They adapt to our tactics in real time. They learn from every engagement, and they never ever surrender. But the worst part wasn't their impossible weapons, or their uncanny ability to predict Corvani battle plans. The worst part was how they looked at their captors during the few times Corvani forces managed to take prisoners. Vextal would never forget the first human they captured alive. The young man had been badly wounded in a raid on a Corvani forward base, and Vextal expected him to break under interrogation within hours. Instead, the human spent the entire session asking questions. Your armor uses some kind of reactive plating, doesn't it? The prisoner had asked, completely ignoring the pain inducer attached to his arm. And those neural implants behind your ears, are those for battlefield communication? How do you prevent signal interference? The human wasn't looking at Vexal with fear or hatred. He was studying him with the intense curiosity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Every Corvani soldier, every piece of equipment, every tactical decision was just another puzzle to be solved, and humans, Vextel was learning, were very good at solving puzzles. By the 5th week of occupation, Vextel's legendary confidence had crumbled like ancient stone. He sat in his makeshift command bunker, staring at casualty reports that made no sense. The mighty Corvani Empire, conqueror of 47 worlds, was losing to a species that had been using gunpowder just decades ago. The humans had done something that every military strategist in the galaxy said was impossible. They were actually winning. The morning started like any other nightmare. Stel was reviewing deployment schedules when every screen in the bunker suddenly flickered and went black. Then, impossibly, a human face appeared on all of them simultaneously. It was a young man with sharp eyes and a calm expression that somehow made Vextel's blood run cold. "Good morning, Commander Vextel," the human said in perfect Corvani, as if he were greeting an old friend. "My name is Wu Jin. I believe we need to talk." Vextel jumped to his feet, frantically signaling his communications officer. "Cut the transmission. How are they accessing our secure channels?" But Wu Jin continued speaking as if he could hear every word. "I'm afraid that won't work, Commander. You see, we've been studying your quantum-encrypted networks for the past 3 weeks. Fascinating technology, really. But you left some interesting vulnerabilities in the encryption algorithms." The blood drained from Vexel's face. The Corvani quantum encryption was supposed to be unbreakable. It had taken their best scientists centuries to develop, using mathematics so complex that only the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy even understood the basic principles. How could humans have cracked it in 3 weeks? "Possible," Vextel whispered, but Wu Jin heard him anyway. "We thought so too," initially the human replied with that unnerving smile. "But you'd be surprised what you can accomplish when you have access to wreckage from 47. Different conquered civilizations. Each species you've defeated left behind pieces of their technology in your ship designs. We simply had to ask the right questions." Wu Jin leaned forward, and his expression grew serious. "Speaking of questions, we know about the Theta-class destroyers you have hiding behind Luna. We know about your shield harmonics, your backup power systems, and the exact frequency modulation you use for ship-to-ship communications. We also know about the neural toxin you plan to deploy tomorrow at 0800 hours?" Vexel's hearts nearly stopped. The neural toxin was classified at the highest levels of Imperial command. Only a handful of officers knew about the plan to release it into Earth's atmosphere, and none of them would have betrayed the Empire. "Also know how to stop all of it," Wu Jin continued, his voice carrying a quiet confidence that was more terrifying than any threat. "Consider this a courtesy warning, Commander. You have 12 hours to evacuate your orbital fleet. After that, we can't guarantee their safety." The transmission cut out, leaving Vextel staring at blank screens and feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Around him, his officers sat in stunned silence, their scaled faces pale with shock. "Sir," his communications officer stammered, "should we warn the fleet?" Vextel wanted to dismiss it as human bluffing, but something in Wu Jin's tone told him the threat was very real. Still, he was a Corvani commander, and the Empire didn't negotiate with primitives. "Maintain radio silence," he ordered. "Deploy the toxin as scheduled." The attack came at dawn, just as Wu Jin had promised. Vextel stood on the observation deck of his bunker, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. High above, invisible to the naked eye, the Corvani orbital fleet prepared to release enough neural toxin to kill every human on the planet. Then the sky erupted in fire. Human aircraft streaked upward through the atmosphere like metallic angels of vengeance. But these weren't the crude flying machines the Corvani had observed during their initial reconnaissance. These ships moved with impossible grace and speed, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that shouldn't have existed in human technology. Where did they get those ships? Vextel breathed, pressing his face against the reinforced window. His science officer, Mixauer, was frantically scanning the attacking aircraft. "Commander, these aren't human designs. They're based on our own technology, but the improvements, I don't understand how they work. The human fighters engaged the orbital fleet with devastating precision. Vexthal watched in horror as his mighty warships, vessels that had reduced entire star systems to ash, began falling from the sky like burning meteors. The humans didn't just know where to hit them. They seemed to understand Corvani ship design better than the engineers who had built them. "The Dreadclaw's taking heavy damage," his fleet coordinator reported, his voice cracking with panic. "They're targeting the power coupling between the main reactor and the shield generators." Vexthal's flagship, the mighty Dreadclaw, had been the pride of the Corvani fleet. Its armor could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons, and its shields were powered by 3 fusion reactors. It should have been invincible, but as he watched, a sleek human fighter fired a single precise shot at what looked like an insignificant panel on the ship's hull. The beam struck the exact spot where the main power conduit ran between the reactor core and the shield matrix, a vulnerability so obscure that most Corvani engineers didn't even know it existed. The Dreadclaw split in half like a ripe fruit, its massive hull cracking along structural lines that should have been impossible to exploit. The explosion lit up the morning sky like a second sun, and debris rained down across the continent. "They used our own power core against us," Nexfer whispered in disbelief. "That weapon overloaded the reactor by feeding its own energy back through the power coupling. It's brilliant." Before Vexthal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bunker. His tactical display showed human ground forces approaching from 3 directions, moving with coordinated precision that suggested months of planning, not the desperate improvisation of a conquered species. "All units, fall back to secondary positions," Vexthal ordered, but he already knew it was too late. The humans had studied every Corvani defensive protocol, every fallback position, every emergency procedure. The assault on his command post began within minutes. Human soldiers moved through his defenses like they had built them personally, knowing exactly which corridors to avoid, which doors would be locked, and which ventilation shafts provided the best access routes. Leading the attack was a human, female named Yunji. Her squad equipped with armor that looked suspiciously similar to Corvani battlesuits, but somehow lighter and more flexible. When Vexthal tried to stop her advance with his plasma rifle, the energy beam simply bounced off her chest plate without leaving so much as a scorch mark. "It's impossible," he muttered, checking his weapon's power levels. "This is military-grade plasma. It should have melted through any human armor." Yunji approached him calmly, her helmet retracting to reveal a young face marked by intelligence and determination. Her fighters took positions around the command center, their movements professional and efficient. They looked like soldiers who had been fighting Corvani for decades, not weeks. "How?" Vexthal demanded, his voice breaking with frustration and fear. "How do you know our weaknesses? How did you build weapons that can destroy our ships? How did you crack our encryption?" Yonji smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Vexthal had ever seen on a human face. There was no hatred in it, no anger or desire for revenge. Instead, there was something far more frightening. The quiet satisfaction of a teacher whose students had finally understood the lesson. "Because we listen, Commander," she said simply. "We learn, and we never, ever forget." The war moved to space, and with it came Vexthal's true education in the nightmare that human warfare could become. What he had witnessed on Earth's surface was merely the opening act of a cosmic horror show that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his shortened life. Vexthal stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Voidstalker, watching his tactical displays with growing unease. The retreat from Earth had been humiliating enough, but now something far worse was happening. Human ships were appearing throughout Corvani space, not just in ones or twos, but in entire fleets that seemed to materialize from the darkness between. "Stars, Commander," his sensor officer reported, his voice tight with fear. "We're detecting human vessels in the Nexus system, the Corvel mining colonies, and, sir, they're even showing up near our outer defensive perimeters." Vexthal felt his stomach drop. Those locations were scattered across thousands of light years, deep in the heart of Corvani territory. How had humans traveled so far so quickly? More importantly, how did they even know those systems existed? "Show me the ship configurations," he ordered, dreading what he might see. The holographic display lit up with detailed scans of the human vessels, and Vexel's worst fears were confirmed. These weren't captured Corvani ships or crude human modifications. These were entirely new designs that looked like they had been crafted by master engineers from a dozen different civilizations. The hull plating had the distinctive crystalline structure of Zephyrian defensive technology, but reinforced with the adaptive metal compounds that only the Voidwalkers had mastered. The weapon systems incorporated Corvani plasma technology, but the focusing arrays used principles that looked suspiciously like ancient precursor mathematics. Most disturbing of all, the ship's energy signatures showed power cores that seemed to be running on pure dark matter, a technology that no known species had ever successfully harnessed. "This is impossible," Vexel whispered. But even as he said it, he knew he was looking at the impossible made real. His science officer, Nexfer, was running increasingly frantic calculations. "Commander, these ships shouldn't be able to exist. The power requirements alone would need technology from at least 8 different species. And some of these modifications contradict basic physics as we understand it." But Vexthil was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. The humans hadn't just been fighting the Corvani Empire. While his people had been focused on conquering one primitive world, the humans had somehow been studying every species in the known galaxy. They'd been talking to the other races, he realized aloud. While we were fighting them on Earth, they were making contact with every civilization we've ever conquered, every species we've ever fought. The terrible truth hit him like a physical blow. Humans had turned the Corvane invasion into a galaxy-wide educational opportunity. Every species the Empire had defeated, every world they had conquered, every technology they had stolen, the humans had somehow gained access to all of it. 3 days later, Vexel's worst fears were confirmed. When a single human vessel appeared near the Corvani homeworld, the ship was sleek and deadly, its hull gleaming with energy fields that seemed to bend light around its edges. As it approached, Vexel could see that it was escorted by a small fleet of support vessels, each one incorporating design elements from different galactic civilizations. Commander, his communications officer announced, "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. The human captain is requesting to speak with you directly." Vexel nodded grimly. "Put him through." Main view screen flickered to life, revealing a human male who looked to be in his early 30s. He had calm, intelligent eyes, and the bearing of someone who had seen combat but preferred negotiation. This was Dongwu, though Vexel wouldn't learn his name until later. "Commander Vexel," the human said, his Corvani perfect despite the fact that his species had only learned of the language's existence weeks ago. "We meet at last. I've heard quite a lot about you." "What do you want, human?" Vexel snarled. Though he felt anything but confident, Dongwu smiled, and it was a genuinely warm expression that somehow made everything worse. "We want to talk, Commander. We have analyzed your psychological profile from our previous encounters. We believe you're a reasonable being who cares about his people. We know you will not surrender until you're certain your species is safe. Therefore, we offer terms." The terms were surprisingly simple. Complete Corvani withdrawal from all human space, immediate cessation of all hostile activities, and a full exchange of military and technological knowledge. In return, the humans would guarantee the safety of the Corvani homeworld and all civilian populations. "And if we refuse?" Vexel asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. "Then we'll be forced to demonstrate why acceptance would be in your best interests," Dongwu replied calmly, as if responding to some invisible signal. One of the human escort vessels moved toward a nearby Corvani dreadnought. Vexel watched in fascination and horror as the human ship fired what looked like a simple energy beam at the massive warship's hull. The beam struck the dreadnought's main gravity generator, a heavily shielded component buried deep in the ship's core. But instead of trying to destroy the generator, the human weapon did something far more elegant and terrifying. It somehow reversed the gravity field, causing the massive ship to implode in on itself like a collapsing star. Impossible, Nexfer breathed. The gravity generators are hardened against exactly that kind of attack. The safety protocols alone should have prevented any external manipulation. Dongwu heard him through the open channel. Your safety protocols were indeed quite sophisticated, Nexfer, he said, somehow knowing the science officer's name. Well, they were designed to prevent attacks from other Corvani technology. Weren't prepared for modifications based on Zephyrian quantum mechanics, combined with Voidwalker dimensional engineering and enhanced by precursor mathematical principles. Vextel felt the last of his confidence crumble.
How do you know?
About the precursors? Their technology was lost millions of years ago. Lost to you, perhaps, Dongwu replied. But the Keepers of the Outer Rim have maintained some of their archives. Fascinating people, the Keepers. Very eager to share their knowledge with species that approach them with respect rather than plasma cannons, as if to prove his point. More human ships began appearing throughout the system. But these weren't crewed entirely by humans. Vexel could see Zephyrian energy signatures, Voidwalker dimensional drives, and even what looked like Keeper temporal stabilizers. Your species thinks in terms of conquest, Commander, Dongwu explained, his voice patient and educational. See the galaxy as a collection of resources to be taken, species to be dominated, technologies to be stolen. We think in terms of understanding. Every weapon you've used against us, we've improved. Every tactic you've employed, we've countered. Every strength you've shown, we've exceeded. The human gestured toward his diverse fleet. While you were trying to destroy us, we were building alliances. While you were taking what you wanted by force, we were earning the respect and cooperation of species across the galaxy. Your invasion of Earth wasn't just an attack on humanity, it was a demonstration to every conquered species that the Corvani Empire could be defeated. Vextel looked around at his officers, seeing his own dawning. Horror reflected in their faces. The humans had done something that military strategists had said was impossible. They had turned a single planetary invasion into a galaxy-wide revolution. Every species you've conquered, every world you've subjugated, every civilization you've destroyed, they've all been waiting for someone to show them that the mighty Corvani Empire could bleed. Dongwu continued. We didn't just defend Earth, Commander. Gave the galaxy hope. The human ships continued to arrive, each one a testament to the incredible alliance that humanity had somehow forged in the span of just a few weeks. The Corvani Empire had spent centuries building their military might through conquest and fear. The humans had accomplished something far more powerful in less than a month. They had built it through friendship now. As Vextel recorded his final words in the twisted wreckage of his command ship, the terrible truth became clear like a nightmare finally coming into focus. His breathing was getting weaker, purple blood pooling beneath his broken body, but he had to finish this recording. The galaxy needed to know what humanity really was. The view screen flickered one last time, and a human face appeared. But this wasn't the face of a conqueror or a warrior drunk on victory. This was something far more frightening. The human looked like a teacher who had just finished grading the most important test of his career. Commander Vextel, the human said gently, his voice carrying the kind of patience that teachers use with struggling students. My name is Yunho. I need you to understand something very important before you die, something that will change how you see everything that has happened. Vextel tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough that sent more blood trickling down his chin. Through his failing vision, he could see that this human was different from the others he had encountered. Older, calmer, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of vast knowledge. Earth was never our homeworld, Commander, Yunho continued, his words falling like hammer blows on Vexel's consciousness. It was our school. The revelation hit Vexel like a direct plasma bolt to the chest. For a moment, he forgot about his pain, forgot about his dying ship, forgot about everything except the impossible implications of what he had just heard. The humans you fought, the ones you thought were primitive natives defending their planet, Yunho explained, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. They were students. Young members of our species sent to Earth to learn about galactic civilization through direct experience. Vextel's mind reeled as pieces of a massive puzzle suddenly snapped into place. The way the humans had seemed to learn so impossibly fast, The way they had adapted to Corvani technology in mere days. The way they had somehow known about other galactic species and their capabilities. Every invasion, every conquest that species like yours have conducted over the past 1,000 years. Unho continued. We've been watching, studying, learning. Your attack on Earth wasn't a surprise to us, Commander. It was simply our final examination. The dying Corvani commander thought back to all the strange behavior he had witnessed during the war. The way humans had broadcast their own biological data while their cities burned. The way they had asked questions, even while being tortured. The way they had seemed more interested in understanding Corvani technology than in simply surviving. We're taking notes, Vextel whispered, his voice barely audible. The whole time they were taking notes. Yunho nodded approvingly, like a teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. Very good, Commander. Yes, they were learning. Every weapon you used, every tactic you employed, every weakness you revealed, it was all being carefully documented and analyzed. Through the cracked viewport of his dying ship, Vexel could see human vessels surrounding him. But they weren't closing in for the kill. Instead, they were maintaining a protective formation, as if they were trying to preserve something valuable. It took him a moment to realize that the valuable thing was him. You want me alive? He gasped. Of course we do, Yunho replied. You're going to tell this story to every species in the galaxy. You're going to help them understand what humanity really is, and what we're capable of when we put our minds to learning. Vextel's ship shuddered as human engineering teams began boarding, but they weren't coming to loot or destroy. They were coming to repair, to stabilize, to keep him alive long enough to serve as humanity's messenger. We now understand how galactic civilizations fight, think, and organize themselves. Yunho continued, his voice filled with the quiet satisfaction of a scholar who had just completed a lifetime's work. The Corvani Empire taught us about military strategy and the psychology of conquest. The Zephyrians taught us about economic manipulation and resource control. Voidwalkers taught us about political intrigue and the art of making alliances. Human's smile widened. And Vexel realized with growing horror that every major galactic power had unknowingly been providing lessons to humanity for generations. The Precursor Keepers taught us about ancient technologies and the deep history of the galaxy, Yunho went on. The Hive Minds taught us about collective consciousness and distributed intelligence. The Machine Collective taught us about artificial intelligence and the integration of organic and synthetic life. Each revelation was like another piece of a cosmic puzzle clicking into place. Humanity hadn't just been hiding on one small planet. They had been everywhere, watching everything, learning from every species they encountered. Each species has been an excellent teacher, Yunho said, his tone genuinely grateful, though most didn't realize they were teaching. You all assumed we were primitive because we didn't build the same kinds of ships or use the same technologies. But we were building something far more valuable than weapons or starships. What? Vextel managed to croak. Understanding. Yunho replied simply. Complete, perfect understanding of how this galaxy works, how its people think, how its civilizations rise and fall. We've been the ultimate students, Commander, and now our education is complete. Medical teams were working on Vexthal now, human doctors using a combination of Corvani biology and medical knowledge from a dozen other species to keep him alive. They worked with the efficiency of people who had been studying alien physiology. For decades, you're going to live, Commander, Yunho said, his voice warm with genuine concern. Long enough to return to your people and tell them what you've learned? Long enough to warn the galaxy about what's coming. What's coming? Vextal whispered. Yunho's expression grew serious. For the first time, Vextal saw a hint of the vast intelligence that lurked behind those deceptively human eyes. Peace, Commander. Real, lasting peace. But not the kind that comes from conquest or fear. The kind that comes from understanding. We've learned how every species in this galaxy thinks, how they fight, how they can be defeated. But more importantly, we've learned how they can be helped, how they can be guided, how they can be made better. With his final breath before the medical stasis field took hold, Vextal understood the galaxy's new reality. Humanity hadn't just learned to fight like other species. They had learned to think like them, to predict their actions, to understand their deepest motivations and fears. They could become whatever they needed to be to help or hinder any civilization they encountered. The last thing he saw before the stasis field activated was Yunho's smile. It wasn't cruel or threatening. It was grateful, like a teacher thanking a student for helping with a particularly challenging lesson. "Thank you for the lesson, Commander," Yunho said softly. "Your species taught us so much about the nature of power and conquest. Now class is in session for the rest of the galaxy, and humanity is ready to teach what we've learned." As consciousness faded, Vextal realized that the galaxy was about to discover what happened when the ultimate students became the ultimate teachers. And somehow, he suspected that the lesson would be unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. The galaxy would never be the same. Again, the end.